thrilled to have the opportunity to have Mark Stevens here with me on the podcast. Mark, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling well. Thank you.
Oh,
Good morning, or rather, I should say good afternoon to you. Thank you, Todd, for
yes.
having me here.
Well, thank you so much. Are you joining me from Santa Cruz, California?
I am.
Beautiful. I've only had a chance to visit. What an amazing place. What a beautiful spot. What's the weather like there today?
It's still 10 o'clock in the morning, so let's say it's about 65 degrees, heading towards the mid 80s. I'm in the Santa Cruz Mountains. If I drive 10 minutes down to the coast, it's foggy and chilly, kind
Mm.
of in keeping with Mark Twain once said that the coldest winter of his life was a summer in San Francisco. It's similar here. Anyway, it's beautiful. I feel lucky to be here. It's my hometown, and I was born and raised here.
Oh man. Well, on that note, I read your bio, which by the way is amazing. I recommend everybody listening to visit your website, markstevensyoga.com, and to read your bio. And one of the reasons that, the first thing that really caught my attention is the picture of your mom practicing full cobra pose in uh, around that area. And what was the date of that? It was like 1931. Am I right on
1931. She was born in
1931?
1923.
What a cool photo of your mom. I think she was like 8 years old there. And
Mm.
just to even see a black and white photo like that from the 30s, and just to think about your mom already being introduced to yoga and to be practicing in that time frame, and for you to have that history in that area, that's pretty amazing.
They lived farther north in Humboldt County and would come
Mhm.
down here to Santa Cruz in the summertime and
Gotcha.
have holidays. So they're there in the San Lorenzo River, which is a stone's throw from me here. I learned to swim in that river.
Nice.
And just to be clear, she's doing a yoga form, a yoga posture. She's also being a little girl just playing around in the river
Ah,
with her sisters right there and her
I
dad
wondered
watching
about
from that
that.
dock.
I
And so
wonder.
she's not, how to say, she was being a kid just kind of doing these things that she had seen. She wasn't doing yoga in some way that she was doing a practice. She was playing around doing some contortionist thing that I think a lot of kids were doing in the 30s because it had become very popular in the press with all these touring yogis doing contortionist demonstrations around the country.
At that point in 1930 in America, who would have been the influencers from India that your mom potentially would have seen? Was Yogananda in the United States at that point yet?
Yogananda is not here at that point. There are several others. There's an interesting phenomena that happens. In fact, we back up a little bit to get at it, and that is that at the 1893 World's Fair, in conjunction with it, there was what was called the World Parliament of Religions. And they invited this Swami from India named Swami Vivekananda to give a talk. And along in conjunction with this talk, in which it really is a formative moment in the introduction of yoga to the West, he wowed the audience, not just with explaining a perspective on how we can get at qualities of consciousness and awakening. And it was very much a spiritually oriented talk at the Parliament of Religions. It wasn't about chaturanga, up dog, down dog. But to get their attention even more, he had a few yogis there with him who demonstrated yoga postural practices, and that really wowed the audience because now
Um,
he wasn't just talking about how this approach to kind of spiritual practice is one that involves embodiment, the body mind as a whole, but he showed them doing these fantastic kinds of things.
mm,
This led to a flood of yogis coming from India, gurus, or sometimes self-anointed gurus coming from India from the turn of the century. Really is when it really took off for the next 20 to 25 years. And they toured the US and Canada to some extent. And their entourages, they they each was trying to outdo the other in terms of like the the very acrobatic, gymnastic, contortionist kinds of things that they did. And indeed, we see that a lot of what they were doing was very clearly tapping into circus performance art, circus contortionism, as well as acrobatics and gymnastics. It wasn't necessarily so much that they were showing us practices that were deeply rooted in India as they
mm.
were in an already globalized culture, physical culture and all. But anyway, the point of that is that this was all over the newspapers and magazines of the day. And so where exactly, say, my mother found the idea, or she and her sisters and friends found the ideas or the inspiration, it was everywhere in the culture at that time, as far as I understand it. And we don't have any significant influencers such as early ones, Theo Spinard, in terms of American influencers in New York in the mid 1930s. Theo Spinard is a hugely significant player in bringing yoga into the U.S. at least, and then certainly Yogananda. But Yogananda is more post World War II.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1958. I'm about to turn 66 any minute. Actually not any minute, but pretty soon here.
Nice.
Yeah.
What was your take on your realization of the Beatles and the influence the Beatles had with yoga?
Yeah, so again, like, as a kid, for whatever reasons, I mean, there's probably lots of them. The Beatles weren't so much on my radar screen. I was into other music. I don't know. I think that I was more into more kind of hard rock and roll or something when I was a younger kid. But in the
Yeah.
'60s, I wasn't even attuned to that. I wasn't attuned to, say, music in those kinds of ways. But my family was how to say, we didn't have a television. We had radio. We listened to radio broadcasts maybe once a week together, like sort of family radio hour. But we had no television, and there was definitely no music uh, projecting through the house. And so we were somewhat insulated from a lot of what was
Mm.
happening in that aspect of culture. And I mean, one thing has sort of brought us to some realization of things. In fact, my first ever observation of yoga was here in the San Lorenzo Valley where I am, where around 1965, 66, so I'm like 7, 8 years old, these very colorful vans and buses and cars started to show up with people
Wow.
with long hair and funky clothes and things we had never seen in a very, what was then a very, very, very conservative
Mm.
area. And it was a shock to our parents and everyone, I think, of their generation. But for kids, it was fascinating. And the point is that these were the early hippies, and people that were on the bus, the Mary Pranksters and all, came through the San Lorenzo Valley.
Wow.
Cannabis was in the air,
Mm.
psychedelics, I'm sure, were in the bloodstreams, and our swimming hole, the Garden of Eden, just a little ways from where I am, about a kilometer down the river from here, is the first place I ever saw yoga. It's also the first place I
Wow.
ever saw sex. As we saw these hippies down there, like doing what they were doing, right? They were smoking weed and doing these things, and so there they were doing these forms that I would only later come to realize that they were doing yoga and that they had found those practices somewhere. And I don't know just where those particular people found them, but so early on here, yoga is happening. The Beatles, I don't get that connection
Mm.
to Maharishi and all that connections, particularly to George Harrison, until much later when I'm more interested in learning about yoga's histories and all.
Man, I love hearing these stories because I love the evolution of the hippie culture, and obviously you were in ground zero being in Santa Cruz. I had a chance to live in Humboldt County in 1992, and it was an incredible experience, and I'll never forget it. I Such a beautiful part of the country and in the world, and amazing that you got a chance to experience all that from that kind of initial starting point. I did notice in your bio, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you said that you dropped out of school when you were in eighth grade. Is that correct?
It is.
And now you're a doctor. You have a doctorate. So
I don't. I have
oh,
all but I have an
my
ABD, all
apologies.
but dissertation. I
My
bailed
apologies.
out.
Okay,
No,
gotcha.
I'm happy to tell that story as well, but
Okay,
that's
cool.
another. Sure.
So how do you go from leaving school in eighth grade to seeking academia? And how did that transpire?
Let's see. I To start, I mean, and I also note that in that long first person bio on my website. I grew up in a family, not just of sort of spiritual seekers, but people, and very, very, my parents very connected to the environment, the natural environment, and all, who gave us a sense of spirituality, both in sort of formal ways. My mother, in particular, was a Christian fundamentalist, they also found a sense of spirit and spirituality in nature, and got us and sort of imbued that in our daily lives. We're connected to sort of experiencing that in the world. Both of my parents were also educated. They'd gone to university. My mother taught nursing. She was really, she had been in a different generation. She probably would have been a doctor. I don't know, but she was of that level of interest in medical sciences and all. And my father also. And so we grew up in a house, I guess I mentioned before, there was no television. There were lots of books, and we also played like crazy inside and outside, but we were brought up to learn, and it started really, really early. It was not a Waldorf type experience where you choose to read if you want to by the time you're like 8 years old. We were reading at 3 years old, and so I started learning, and loved it. I loved the experience of learning, and so things changed a lot. My mom died when I was 10. She had breast cancer, and then it developed into brain cancer, and so she died, and we moved south to the Mojave Desert, and my father's brother lived, and so I lived there in the Upper Mojave for during my teen years. When I first arrived there, it was a tough transition, and by the time I was into 8th grade, I was also a latchkey kid. I got in a lot of trouble, and ended up in juvenile institutions, initially Los Angeles County Central Juvenile Hall, foster care, and other such places, in and out of those places. And pretty early on, with a very strong anti-authoritarian attitude, and a lot of anger, frankly, a lot of anger about things that were happening in my life, um, I faded out of school. I faded out, dropped out of school. And by the time I was 14, I had a fake ID that said I was 16. I had a job. I worked. I got a fake driver's license. I was living with some friends. I didn't go to school. Those times when I accumulated 60 high school credits at Central Juvenile Hall High School, LA County, one of 19 juvenile institutions in LA County. And so, which I would later work in as a teacher, and then later as senior administrator and consultant many years later. But anyway, so a few things happen in there that also connect to yoga. And one of those was that I was getting stoned a fair bit, which I don't recommend for adolescents. I don't think it's generally good for the adolescent brain. I think there's a massive rewiring. There is, in fact, a massive rewiring, cognitive rewiring that occurs during adolescence. And I think that a lot of kids that are consuming significant cannabis, for instance, are not doing themselves a favor in terms of their cognitive development. I'm happy to have a focused conversation on that at any time, or any of these topics for that matter. But so where I'm going with this is to say that getting stoned, but also exploring other things, other medicinal sorts of plants. It was in that experience that I one time had an experience which was wow. And I was all the while during all those years out of school reading like crazy. Someone had given me a collection of books called The Great Books, which is the great book to the Western world, from early Greeks to mid 20th century literature. And I'd been consuming that literature from when I was pretty young. And so I still had those books, was reading like crazy, interested in learning about everything. And that psychedelic experience led me to say, wow, there is something else going on here that those books didn't talk about. What is this? And that a friend said, oh, there are all these books on Eastern philosophy and metaphysics that get at those questions. And there's these radio broadcasts at night with Alan Watts on Pacifica Radio, and he's talking about Zen Buddhism and yoga and all these things. I'm like, click, click. Oh, I didn't go click, 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 click. Didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
I turned on the radio and I went to a library, and I got some books, D.T. Suzuki's books, and a number of others that I started to dive into on Eastern philosophy, and not just Indian, but Eastern as in Chinese philosophy, Taoism, and other philosophies. And so what happens there? Oh, and then on a radio broadcast, Alan Watts, he's talking about yoga at some point. I'm like, what's yoga? And so, he's describing it to some degree. And I went to the local library and I found a book on yoga. It was Richard Hittleman's 28-day yoga plan. And he had I learned later, he had a TV show and all, along with Lilia Sfolan and others at the time, not with her, but at the same time. So I got this book, the 28-day yoga plan, and poured through it, and it had all these pictures of postures, and I'm like trying these things out. And I was with that for a few months. I went back to the library and I found there only one other book on yoga. It was titled Light on Yoga by BKS Iyengar. I was like, serious book. So I got home, 50 pages on philosophy and history. I was like, wow. And then these practice plans, like a 5-year plan. I was like, wow. I dove in. And so for about a total of 2 years there, I was 16, 17 at that point. I started to read about and practice yoga without the benefit of a teacher. Coming full circle on your question, how did I get from there to academia? I was in and out of getting in trouble at that time. and not doing smart things, just not making good, intelligent decisions. Sometimes I think I did. I had really strong support, particularly from my brother and sister, who are both a little bit older than I am, 2 and 3 years older, and a lot of guidance from them along the way, and kind of keeping me more on the rails with everything. As I think I might have helped them as well. But when I was 16, I faced a situation where I was either going to get in serious trouble, or they were going to make me either go into the military or go to university, go to college. I'm like, well, how do I ever get into college? I haven't been to high school. And they said, well, just that year, there was an exam introduced in California called the California High School Proficiency Exam, not the GED, General Education Diploma, which is for if you're 18 or older. This was for kids who were 16 or 17 who wanted to test out of high school to either go work, often farm working kids, or other kids wanting to go to the family business, or wanting to go on to college. And they were like, here's this test. If you take it and pass it, you can go right to college. I'm like, really? With no high school? They were like, yes. I was like, give me the test. So I took the test, I passed the test, and I
Wow.
enrolled at the a local community college. And I never looked back. I got super involved in all kinds of things at the campus, especially my academic studies, but also it's where I was already involved in political work in the local community, particularly, as I note in the biography, doing work around police brutality in the area where I lived in northern LA County in the Mojave Desert. And then once in the college, more started to open up to me on the political realm. I got really involved in things on campus, student body president. I ran student government. Not ran. I was in student government and all. How to say it? So I never looked back. I went from there to transferring from there to the University of California campus here in Santa Cruz. Came back home as soon as I could, frankly, and went from there. From there, going forward. So I'll stop. That was a long-winded response to that
No,
question.
thank you. That's fascinating. I can relate to a lot of that, and I love to hear how you've taken a non-traditional leading back to traditional and weaving out of traditional and but ultimately your love for learning and reading is what seems like the basis for everything you've been able to do. That's incredible, Mark. I love hearing that story and that trajectory. And also that you got into social justice issues in, I'm thinking this was like late 60s or early 70s at this point. What, when you said you were
Mid
mid
70s. By
70s?
yeah, 74, I want to say we got involved with it. It was called the Antelope Valley Police Brutality Action Project. And it was also organized through a local ACLU chapter in the Antelope Valley, which is a desert valley in northern LA County that had originally been a ranching community, and it became a military. Well, the Air Force Flight Test Center is there, and also Air Force Plant 42, which is where a lot of its most secret
Mm,
aircraft are built and tested. And and so like stealth bombers, and back in the day, U-2s would fly through there. Anyway, the point is that it wasn't the most culturally enriching place for kids to be, I would say. But a lot of other things were happening. And there was a pretty, I would say, vicious law enforcement apparatus there in terms of the way they dealt, particularly with people of color,
mm, mm,
most emphasized, and
mm,
in the Palmdale area of the Antelope Valley,
mm.
but also with others. And working class kids like myself were often uh, often not dealt with in a very how to say the way one might hope that law enforcement might, as I think most law enforcement officers do, respect human beings and respect people's rights and things like that. I have
Yes.
a lot of respect for law enforcement generally, even as some will go off the rails.
And I noticed that you, in your attempt to continue to study and learn, found that in your what you, from when reading your bio, what you observed with what was actually going on in the society around you, that you saw there was a slight disconnect in terms of the academia and the philosophical side or the study side, and then what was actually going on. And the fact that then full circle, you were able to bring yoga programs into prison programs. Is that correct? Because if we jump a little further ahead, I mean, I know I'm jumping way ahead because you have a significant yoga curriculum available for those of us students and teachers. You have Teaching Yoga, a book you've written called Teaching Yoga, a book called Yoga Sequencing, which I have, which I absolutely love, a book called Yoga Adjustments. You have a book that's more recently put out called Yoga for Better Sleep, and a book on yoga therapy. Can you tell me a little bit about your work within the prison system and how you've been able to affect people's lives with yoga in that environment?
Thank you. Yes. I want to sort of be clear about one point in case it was
Please.
not clear in what I said before, just in order to go back a moment in order to go more clearly forward. That is, um, after I got into when I transferred out of when I went to the University of California in Santa Cruz. By that time, really, even when I was in the community college, I didn't do yoga anymore. I did yoga. I played around with it for a couple of years with those books. Never a teacher, so it's not like I have a continuous practice from that time. I basically forgot about yoga all those years in university. And but no, but what I very much dove into activist social change work, and that's stayed with me to this day. I'm still active in my community, so and try to be active in other ways. It was matters of society and the environment and all around the world. And so many years after coming into academia, after studying here in Santa Cruz and then working for a few years in Los Angeles, I went down there for a summer job doing environmental activist work. Um, that summer job turned into a long-term position with that organization. I was working for Ralph Nader at the time, and before he ever ran for president and all, years before. So was working with him and others doing activist environmental work in LA, and at that time went to graduate school and dove in deeply to a doctoral program at UCLA. And deep into that program, I was there in that program for 7 years, nearly finished, when there were a lot of things happening in LA that were extremely complex, socially, politically, financially for many people, just a very, very difficult place. Also a wonderful place, by the way, an incredibly diverse region, and there's so many wonderful things. LA often gets a bad rap. I love LA in many ways, but anyway, the point is that I didn't sign up for academia to be purely in academia. Never had that idea. I had the vision from the beginning of having one foot in academia and one foot in activism and blending those, using each to inform the other. And my academic work focused on matters of politics and society and social change. And as I'm saying that, in order to do well in graduate school, you have to really focus on that work. Not that I was still involved with things in LA, politically and all, socially and all, but I really focused on that. But as things got very, very, this was the height of the gang wars in LA. There were more kids being killed per year in LA than at that time the Middle Eastern conflicts in the Irish Northern Ireland conflicts, which were at their hottest point in decades
I'm studying that
every
right
year.
now. I'm studying the whole
Uh-huh.
Irish conflict right now, reading a book called Say
Uh,
Nothing, which is
uh-huh.
fascinating. And I'm also
Oh,
reading a book called The
say nothing.
Reformation about the Catholic Protestant Reformation. And to try to understand the Northern Ireland conflict, I'm learning it's so fascinating to juxtapose that
Absolutely.
with going up.
So
But I
lots
don't
of
want to
people
interrupt you.
being killed.
Yeah.
No, please, please. No. Lots of people were being killed and maimed in those environments in the Middle East during that time and in Northern Ireland. But combine those, and there were more kids under juveniles, kids in LA County alone that were being killed and maimed every year. And so, in relation to that, as I mentioned earlier, 19 juvenile prisons in LA County, and some of them like really hardcore kids. I mean, kids who are doing horrific things who also came from horrific backgrounds, both victims and victimizers, if you will. And and so guns are everywhere, drugs are everywhere. And so the point of that is that I decided to dive in, to get involved, and I took a leave of absence from my graduate school program to do so. And I started working as a day-to-day substitute teacher in Compton Unified School District.
Oh,
And that led
in
very soon
Compton.
after that
Yeah.
in Compton, which
Yes.
was which was in the middle of all of this.
What year
And
is
and
this?
so
What year is this, Mark?
this was in 1990, 90-ish,
90.
90, 90.
Wow.
And so from there, Compton Unified School District gets shut down because there was a bunch of corruption happening in the school district. They got shut down by the state of California. It was called AB 1200. They invoked it and took over the district. And the corruption involved having people on the substitute teacher payroll who didn't exist. And so they just cleared the ranks. They just got rid of every substitute teacher. I still wanted to work with these youth that I was working with, gang members, mostly gang members, I should say, not just gang members. And I asked around, and someone said, "Oh, they're hiring at these schools in those juvenile prisons." I'm like, "Oh, I know those places. I remember those places from my own experience."
Mm.
So
Wow.
a month later, I got a job as a substitute teacher inside of Camp David Gonzalez, a juvenile lockdown camp, prison camp, concertina wire walls as a secure facility for high-end juvenile offenders, if you will. And that led to a regular teaching position, that led to developing programs in in that system, that led to other work in there. Well, at the same time, or right about that time, I was also stressed out. I had a terrible breakup with a girlfriend. I was, confused about what I was doing with academia. And someone said, "You should try yoga." I was like, "Oh, hey, I remember yoga." And I went to a class with Steve Ross, who, by the way, I highly recommend Steve Ross's one book. It's titled Happy Yoga. He's a popular LA teacher, one of the first to play music in a yoga class. He makes yoga fun. Steve Ross, Happy Yoga. And had it not been for his lightheartedness, I might never have gotten into it. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I got it. I got in there. I was like, immediately, I remembered from my own experience, but I was also hearing him and engaging with other people in a class for the first time. I went back the next day, I got into it. And so I was doing yoga when I was now working in those juvenile facilities. And so I continued with that curiosity about yoga and this work that I was doing. And some years later, after I had completed yoga teacher training, some years later, in 1995, I started teaching yoga to some of my students in the classes, kind of as PE, physical education, just informally. And then the principal of the school said, "You could do this even more in these environments. You could bring yoga in here." So I've been teaching yoga in that way. The principal I'd worked with wanted to see more of that kind of a program. I was now working at the central office level of the LA County Juvenile Court Schools, and went to the head of the department, the head of the division, and asked him, "What do you think about bringing yoga into these facilities?" He was like, "Let's talk to the probation department. They run the facilities." And I knew the head chief probation officer, Barry Nydorf, really well. I'd worked with him a lot at that time. And he said, "I love the idea. Let's try it out." So at the same camp where I originally taught, I went back in there teaching yoga as an after school program. So I was shirt and tie administrator consultant during the day, driving out into the mountains to an isolated facility, a prison camp in the mountains, to teach yoga in the afternoons.
Wow.
And it was also inspired by a project that we had done where we brought six Tibetan monks. Barry Bryant and the Samaya Foundation brought six Tibetan monks from Dharamsala to LA, first to Chicago, then to LA, to work with inner city kids. And he discovered that they were in greater, especially harder core kids, were in greater concentrations in these camps, sort of concentration camps, if you almost. And so Barry had brought these Tibetan monks. I had facilitated him getting these Tibetan monks into Camp David Gonzalez. There was a supportive administrator there. So I went on in the wake of that, took advantage of Barry Bryant's work there as well, and organized Yoga Inside Foundation to more formally establish a program, a consistent program of yoga in that facility. It had a palpable, demonstrable, evidence-based impact on the kids that were in there. Rates of violence inside the institution, classroom attendance, classroom sort of performance, if you will, classroom academic performance increased. It had a palpable, measurable effect. And the chief probation officer said, "I want this in all of our camps, all of our facilities."
Wow.
So 16 camps, 3 juvenile halls, we set about to do that. And so formalizing that with Yoga Inside Foundation, I started to train teachers how to teach in that environment. I didn't really know much I wasn't a qualified yoga teacher trainer, I would say. I was qualified to teach yoga. I was a very beginning teacher still, but I also had insight into the conditions of the kids that we were working with, the youth we were working with, and the institutional environment. And that was one of the greatest challenges. It wasn't the kids, it was the institutional environment, including a lot of staff that didn't want us in there and didn't want yoga in there for all kinds of reasons.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so navigating that was a learning experience.
Wow.
And as this took off, LA County Unified School District, I had connections there where I was also working with them as an administrative interface. They said, we want yoga in our schools. I have a lot of schools, um, a lot of schools, a million kids,
Yeah.
right, in schools,
Yeah.
literally. Okay, so we started then expanding into schools, starting with their alternative education, continuing education, excuse me, continuation schools and other alternative education programs and special education programs. That then led to it going all over the place. It sort of took off. That is, they would the LA Unified people would share it with their colleagues in other parts of the country, and they were saying, Minneapolis, New York, please bring these programs. So it went like wildfire, and by the end of 1999, we were in something like I think 150 locations by 2002, and like 250 locations, eventually 300, all over the U.S. in schools, shelters, prisons, mental health facilities, drug rehabs, and all. So that's kind of the long and the short, more the long
That is
of Yoga
amazing.
Inside
I
Foundation.
I love hearing that trajectory. I mean, I think the fact that you had the direct connection in the beginning from having your own challenges as a youth, having been in some of those facilities as a child, and then connecting to yoga and being able to like speak that language, I can see how this would have evolved. And I love the fact that you just kind of, like you said, I wasn't like a really experienced yoga teacher, but I was able to speak that language. I can understand where they're coming from. I guess, I mean, that's incredible that you were able to then expand it on that level and provide this type of outlet for people that need it, probably more than any of us. And I'm curious, can you share an anecdote or story of maybe one of your first times interacting with youth where there was potentially hesitation and reservation, and what type of skill you brought into the table to kind of break that barrier down? Was there some type of event or experience where you thought, how am I going to get through on this? This seems almost impossible, but then you employed some type of skill that was able to break that barrier.
Sure, I love that question. So I think that in working with anyone in these kinds of environments, institutional environments, we might call them generally, I find it's really important to find ways to develop trust, to develop a sense that I don't suggest that you're going to their level in some way, but rather meeting them where they are, greeting them where they are, respecting them for where they are. When I was a classroom teacher in those environments, most of the classrooms, desks were in rows. Everyone had a textbook, and there was an order to be absolutely quiet in the room. And basically, kids were taught to like maybe look at a chapter, take notes, and regurgitate it. As soon as I had my own classroom, I put the books to the side. We set up the classroom in a circle, and I brought in the daily newspaper with the permission of the authorities. I brought in the daily newspaper, and I was teaching social studies. They had more to teach me than I had to teach them. That I really learned to listen to them and to draw them out. And rival gang members in the same room talking about events in the community. It was a way for them to feel empowered in a way, for them to feel heard, and also for me to learn from them and to thereby better give them guidance about a whole variety of things. So with yoga, it's quite similar. I'll suggest that one wants to find ways to develop bonds of trust. And oh, and by the way, in that first facility when I was a teacher there, I stayed after school with some of the other teachers and staff and played basketball with them, taught them ultimate frisbee, introduced a gardening program. We got a grant for a ropes course. So I tried to do things which I engaged with them in ways that were fun. They're kids. Even though some of them were, well, at that particular facility, they were all in there for either murder or attempted murder. They're pretty hardcore kids in terms of violence and all, like hardcore kids. But they were still also kids. And they would laugh, they would cry, they would have various kinds of experiences. They had all kinds of impulse control issues, of course. And this is the height of also not the gang wars, but a crack at. And
Mm.
so coming back to more specifically to your question and ways of sort of connecting, it really in particular kinds of experiences. One of the most shocking, disturbing to me, and it led to an epiphany for me about working with these kids, was noticing the very first time that we taught a yoga class in Shavasana that several kids could not be still. It wasn't that they weren't open to it in their mind. They were. I think they wanted to be still, but there were neurological impacts of drug. Some of them were born addicted to crack. Like their mothers used crack during the pregnancies. They were literally born addicted to crack. We often don't remember this period in our history in the US from 30 years ago or so when this was happening. It was a big thing in LA. And so here you have these kids, some of them have bullets still lodged in their body from being shot. They never removed some of the lead from their body. I had a data thing on how many pounds of lead or tons or something were in kids in LA County juvenile facilities, but
Wow.
they could not relax. Like the neurological effects and visceral organ effects of crack and other drugs had that impact on them. And so it led to then start doing the classes in a very different way. I was deeply into Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga during this period of time, by the way. At that time when I started teaching, I think I was deep in second series when we started. Yeah, second series when we were doing Yoga Inside Foundation. So I was very into like acrobatic gymnastic yoga. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, these are like young, they're fit. It's like let's teach
This
them,
will be
introduce them
perfect.
to
Yeah. This
primary
will be
series
the
Ashtanga. Yeah, exactly,
energy
perfect,
enough.
right?
Yeah.
No,
No.
no,
No.
no. Like
All
I mean,
right.
they were fasted. They wanted
Yeah.
to play with it, right? They
It
were
wasn't
impressed
appropriate.
with this and that.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'll explain why in just a moment. That is, they love playing with things like a chaturanga. They're like, oh, hey, you want to have a push-up contest? I'm like, sure.
Mhm.
And they could usually do way more than I could. They were like, be strong. They lifted weights. And the weird thing about juvenile and adult prisons is they give people weights to get stronger through their muscles and punching bags to hit on, which I guess can be cathartic, but it often leads to the whole idea of being a more um, sort of toxic
Testosterone
male, if you
driven.
will.
Yeah.
Aggressive and all with your energy, and it doesn't necessarily release the anger. It sometimes increases it, I'll suggest. But no less, they were strong, physically fit kids, and they loved playing with the arm balances. I was eventually, in third series and teaching them all kinds of really tricky arm balances and all, floating into Bakasana from down dog kind of thing. They loved playing with those things. But what I came to discover really early is that what they really wanted, and they expressed this to me, where we would have a brief debriefing, but to conversations, opening and closing circles with these classes, like what's going on, basically, what those circles were about. And what they most wanted was quiet. In the institutions, it's noisy. There's always sound. Even at night, people are making noise, and you don't know when a staff or many staff people are going to come in and rattle the place up. They wanted peacefulness. They wanted quiet. What they really wanted in their yoga practices wasn't vigorous vinyasa flow. What they really wanted was restorative yoga.
Mm.
Yin doesn't exist yet. Paul Greeley hasn't written his little book, the Yin Yoga, A Quieter Practice. They wanted a quieter practice. They wanted to slow down, and they wanted permission, an opportunity. They wanted it to be okay to be quiet and to find ways to be more still. So it was really the epiphany for me came about when in observing students at the Dorothy Kirby Center, a secure psychiatric facility. So think of kids who are they've done horrific things, but they're also in a secure psychiatric facility. They've almost all of them grew up extremely abused, and plus now add the drug element to that. Really difficult cases, as we would call it, they were called really complicated kids. And again, it was there observing this that it became abundantly clear. We were in Dorothy Kirby Center pretty early on in developing Yoga Inside, pretty abundantly clear that there was a different approach that we needed to take there. And so there was much more focus on breath practice, pranayama practices that were calming practices. There was much more focus on guided meditation and simple postural practices that focused on reducing tension. And at the same time, we would sometimes play around with, do you want to try a handstand? Get their attention that kind of way.
Mhm.
But so, by the way, the other point I was just making about that talk quickly is that I
Yeah.
also learned how very little my yoga teacher training prepared me for teaching yoga
Oh,
generally,
great
let
thing.
alone in that environment. But really, what I most want to emphasize is how most yoga teacher training programs are teaching cookie cutter approaches rather than how do we work to understand the unique conditions of this diverse array of people in our class or in our community and give support to them based on where they are, how we learn to listen to them and let our students become our own best teachers. I think that's a critical part of every yoga teacher's um, mission, is to learn to listen and honor our students and engage with them in ways that are based on where they are, not where we think they should be or want to take them.
Wow. I mean, I'm speechless, Mark, in a good way. I can't, that's inspiring. So thank you. And it's just like, I could just feel your enthusiasm and the way that you just got in on this and just dove so head first into the deep end and came back to the surface, you know, successful. It sounds to me, I mean, just to even have one experience where you can work with somebody where you could even actually get to the point where you're able to understand they just wanted to slow down and have the permission to find some quiet. I watched one of your videos on YouTube and you were talking about with these social justice challenges. And I think you filmed the video. It was a breathing practice video filmed, I believe it was May of 2020. So we're like at the height of the pandemic, everyone's sheltered down. And you had made mention that there's situations where potentially people can't breathe, but not necessarily from, you know, a disease or an asthma or coronavirus or whatever, but just the pressure of living. Like the intensity of that pressure in those environments that you just can't breathe because there's so much societal pressure. And so from that, I thought, oh, this is going to be such an interesting conversation. And I really am thankful to hear this because when I read your book on sequencing, it's very detailed, methodical, precise, and easy to understand. And I do want to bring us down a little bit of a path and just asking you some anatomical elements that I picked up from reading your book. And one of them was to be alert and aware to, in some vinyasa sequencing programs, the technique of, say, going from Ardha Chandrasana in the Iyengar style of half moon, where we're balancing, say, on our right leg and our right foot on the floor and our left leg is in the air and we're lifting our left hip up, to then rotating on that hip and being able to bring, say, the left hip down, and that repeated full body weight on one hip and then the movement of lifting the pelvis up and down, that you just kind of present this idea of like, let's see if that's actually a good idea or not. Like, if we do repeated movements like that and it wears down our hip joint, do we really want to do that? And so when I read that, it just it opened my mind because I hadn't come across that theory yet. And it got me to start then thinking a little bit more about, what am I doing? Oh, what am I doing? Like, and what am I doing? And is what I'm doing beneficial over the long haul? And then another video I watched, which I love, you presented this question of why not? And I love the way you were, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but
No, please. I'm
you're
writing,
you're you're you're,
taking a
you're
note so I don't forget what you're saying.
you're getting me to think, you're getting me to think outside the box. And I love that. And I feel like I'm thankful for that. I feel like your teaching has really inspired me and helped me. Now to have this chance to actually meet you and speak with you and hear the dynamic of your whole kind of growing up to this point. Oh man, I'm just this is awesome. Thank you. Can you speak a
Thanks for the
little bit,
opportunity to share.
of course. Can you speak a little bit about, for us that are practicing and teaching yoga, blending this idea of why not? Why not give it a try? Why not try something a little different? What could be the harm in just exploring? I'd love to hear any thoughts and ideas you have. I hope that was a specific enough question for you. We could go
I have
back
two
to the whole.
questions.
Okay,
I mean, I heard, so one is,
thank you.
so
I think there
the
was two.
technical specific question of
Yeah.
moving from certain forms to other
Yep.
forms and their effect in the joint, and particularly the hip joint. And I'll come back to that in just a second here. And then
Okay.
the other is I'm hearing is, why not try something a little different? Why not play around with it? And so I'll say that if there's one, and I've said this before, by the way, probably been recorded saying this. If there's one word that's become most frequent in my narrative overlay in my teaching these days is play with it. Play with it. I want my students to play with things. Now, as I say that, and by the way, I had an email exchange with another kind of big influencer teacher here in the San Francisco Bay Area a few weeks ago about this very question of half moon triangle pose, kinds of transitions I'll come back to. And he kind of framed it as, he says, I'm not into mandates. I'm like, well, I'm not mandating. I'm not saying don't ever do that. But he says, I just want my students to do what they prefer to do. I'm like, well, that's an interesting continuum from mandate to preference. I want to frame it in a very different way. Like hard and fast rules. Is there anything in yoga in terms of postural practice that I would say don't do? Very little. There are some asanas that I think are inherently problematic, inherently likely to be injurious to most people. The classic of those that I highlighted in a recent newsletter is Setu Bandhasana, not to be confused with Setu Bandha Saravangasana, bridge pose, but Setu Bandhasana is also called Charlie Chaplin pose. So you're lying on your back and you're propped up on the top of your head and your feet are out there in front. Turned out that's why it's called Charlie Chaplin pose, because of the way the feet are turned out in that way. And your hips are up, everything else, you're arched off the floor. Your head is all the way back. You have extreme hyperextension in the neck, full maxed out cervical hyperextension. The photo I posted on my website is Akina McGregor demonstrating it with the caption saying something like, don't be afraid to try this. And I'm like, with all respect, she's a wonderful teacher and a huge and beautiful, amazing presence in the yoga community from your state, by the way, as I understand it. I think she's
Yeah,
going forward.
I know her. I am friends with her. Yes.
Okay, you can share this with them. Anyway, I'm going to continue with what I'm saying then, is that I think that posture is insanely problematic for the cervical segment of the neck. It puts extreme pressure at the C2-3 cervical nerve outlet, is likely to cause nerve damage over the long run or the short run for some people, aside from conditions of, well, do you know your student's neck condition? Do they know their student? Do they know their own neck condition?
Mm-hmm.
What qualities, how old are they? Is there any arthritis in their neck? How are their discs? Is there any degeneration? Well, if they're over 25, there is. How old are they? What are and even younger people can have a variety of issues in the neck. I would not teach that posture. Now, so that's, I'd say mandate. Okay, no, I'm not going to write it. I'm not going to, propose a law that you're arrested if you practice that posture, but I'm going to strongly discourage that.
I'm with you. I'm
more
with
importantly, you. Okay, so more importantly, I want to give my students informed guidance. I'm with this teacher, this yoga teacher here in the San Francisco area who was saying, mandate to preferences. Like, okay, preferences. So when I very first went to a yoga class, very first class I ever went to, this also ties back into why not try something a little different. The teacher said to sit comfortably. So I was sitting, you can't see my legs, but I'm sitting in a cross-legged position on a stool actually. And I sat comfortably, slumped over with my hands and my elbows on my knees. My knees are up this high off the floor. I was really tight. I was lifting weights and doing triathlons at the time. I was like, it's tight, really tight. I could not touch my toes without bending my knees deeply. And anyway, the point is that the teacher came over and said, try to sit up. I'm like, I am sitting up. They said, well, without your hands on your knees. I said, well, then I'll do this again. And they said, okay, well, sit on these blocks. So I sat on the blocks and did this again. They said, well, why are you doing that? I said, because you said to be comfortable. This is comfortable. Yes. And it's like, so if we only ask our students to do what is comfortable, to do what they prefer, there's also this idea in yoga philosophy of samskaras. I like to suggest some scars, the inherited, sort of conditions of life, and some would say prior lives, whatever. But the idea is that we come to our practice with conditions. What are those conditions? And sometimes they are such that our habits are so habitual, we don't recognize them as habits. And so you might stand in what I call slumpasana. It's comfortable. Or with your weight all the way out in one hip, just standing around like waiting at the grocery store line or something. How are you standing? Habitually, comfortably. So taking that into a yoga practice, if we always suggest to our students, well, do what feels good, do what you prefer, they might very well stay with that. I think the role of a yoga teacher is to respect and honor, try to understand where that student is coming from, understand their conditions and their intentions. And ideally, their intentions are somewhat informed by their conditions. If they have a recently sprained wrist, your intention today should not be to practice your handstands. Just wait a while So you heal your wrist joints, for example. So with that, as teachers, I think our role in part is to provide our students with informed guidance. And that informed guidance based both upon our personal experience, but be careful with that aspect, because what works for me might not work for you or anybody else. So we need to be careful and generalize them from our own experience. Say, oh, yes, this is what I do. So everyone try this. No, we are diverse. So we want to try to understand that diversity, listen to, respect our students, and then give them guidance based on their conditions and intentions and what we understand. And ideally, that's a dialogue, it's a conversation there. And I suggest to my students, well, I'm going to give you some suggestions. Ultimately, defer to what you want to do. I'm not here as an authoritarian figure in your life. If I think you're going to do something, if I think you're doing something that really will be problematic for you, I'm going to tell you that. I'll let you know that in a respectful way. So now let's come back around to this question of triangle and half moon, for example. And so the idea here is, so talk a little bit in anatomies, if you will. In certain forms, we could describe the hips as being or we could postures as being internally rotated and others as externally rotated. And then we could also look at these qualities of internal and external rotation, and specifically standing balancing postures. And it is standing balancing postures where I have the concern about what's happening in the femoral acetabular joint, in the hip joint, if you will. And so in a warrior three, if you imagine this is a femur, thigh bone, and this is a femoral, that could be the greater trochanter, the femur, that bone right there, the ulnar bone. This is the femoral neck, and that's the head. And the head goes into a socket called the acetabulum. It's a deep socket, cartilage on both surfaces, iliofemoral ligament helping hold it all together, and other ligaments. It's a strongly supported structure, labrum giving additional support, as well as musculature, variety. I'm happy to describe all those ligaments and muscles if you want. But the idea here is that if I was in warrior three and my hips are level, this is the other hip over here. And so I'm in warrior three, and most of the weight of my body is on that hip. Why only most? Because, well, some of the weight's below it. It's that leg. So that weight's not there. That's going down there. So here I am, and I'm probably not 100% stable. Oh, by the way, as I'm describing this, keep asking, whose hip? What condition is that hip?
Mm-hmm.
Don't get too tripped out on what we see at Cirque du Soleil or the Olympics. I watched gymnastics the last couple of nights. Incredible. We are not all those gymnasts. Don't necessarily go try everything that they're doing, right? They're locked out, hyperextended elbows. Be careful. Talk to a gymnast when they're 50 about how their joints are doing now. Okay, so what are the conditions of this hip? How old is this person? Where are they in the life cycle? And regarding women, say 70% of students in yoga classes globally, más o menos. Well, how old are they? Are they in their mid-40s or older? Do they have osteopenia, osteoporosis, advanced osteoporosis? Is there arthritis aside from age? Well, increasingly so with age, but is there osteoarthritis? Is there any arthrosis? What's the condition of that hip joint? Is there joint laxity? What are the various conditions of that hip joint? But here we are with all the weight of the body bearing down on it. And when we rotate in this way, and we open to say, you're open in this way from warrior three or revolved half moon to half moon. You're taking this hip that's over here and you're stacking it, or you're already in half moon. How did you get there? Maybe from triangle or warrior two or extended side angle pose. Utthita Parsvakonasana, Utthita Trikonasana, Virabhadrasana 2. Oh, externally rotated hip standing postures. So maybe you're transitioning into it. You have your hips stacked, and then you rotate this way. That rotation with the full weight of the body bearing down the femoral head. This is not walking up and down stairs where you're in flexion, extension. This is moving, and it's not moving from warrior one to warrior two, internal to external, or revolved triangle to triangle, internal to external, with both feet on the ground, with very different biomechanical forces in the hip joint. I'm talking about with one leg standing postures from internal to external. That force, that movement, introduces forces, biomechanical forces here that can begin to stress the femoral neck, especially, and cause a condition called femoral neck syndrome, which are microfissures, become fractures, and a greater weakening, especially if one already has an unfavorable condition such as porosity, porosis, osteo bone porosis, that becomes a significant problem. Now, interesting little side note to this is the person who first suggested this to me at that time, a fellow Ashtangi student, which also someone I apprenticed with for 6 months, was Shiva Ray. And Shiva, if anyone, is sort of, I call her sometimes, I love Shiva, by the way, the queen of creativity.
She
She was
is.
a dancer. She did her master's degree at UCLA in world arts and cultures, the dance department, basically. She did her master's degree, her master's thesis on history of Hatha Yoga and Tantra. She was a dancer in her heart. I know that from knowing her really well personally. She and her husband James back in the day, really close friends. I apprenticed with her and also assisted her on retreats for years. She knew human anatomy and physiology really well. And when she got into designing different creative flows and all, it might seem like she's, if I use this term too many times today, off the rails in her creative sequencing. Shiva's dialed in with an understanding of kinesiology. She studied dance kinesiology. She had a deep insight. So it was Shiva Ray who first suggested to me that this is problematic. She was
Oh,
the very first one. So I was like, really? And I was like, really? I don't feel any problem with that. You know,
uh-huh.
I don't feel any problem with that. She says, well, let me explain a little bit more. And she did. And I then went a little further, way further in, well, maybe she has as well, but from where I first got from her, that is, I went much deeper in trying to understand that force
Mm.
by looking at a variety of different studies about hip movement, particularly in dance. Why in dance? Because there's studies that look at it. Try to find a study anywhere in the literature out there of research, anywhere, a published study that looks in detail at biomechanical forces in the human body with any kind of significant methodology, valid methodology, like the number of people, the diversity of people, and the way it's tested. How, like, it's shocking to me that we don't
There's
have those
there's
studies.
nothing out there.
Look at chaturanga, up dog, down dog. Who's done a study to look at what happens in the shoulders, the hands, the wrists, the arms, and the spine? And chaturanga, up dog, down dog. A serious scientific study? No one. Now, some people say you don't need those studies; just feel it from inside. I love the idea. My second teacher after Steve Ross, my first real substantial teacher I studied with for a few years, is Eric Schiffman. And so
Uh-huh.
Eric was, had studied from when he was 17 in India with Mr. Iyengar. When he was 22, he met Joel Kramer. He describes this in his book from 1996, I think it is, Yoga, the Spirit and Practice of Moving into Stillness, how he met Joel, and Joel Kramer taught him this method of being guided from inside. Lines of energy, playing the edge, all these concepts came from Joel, including two seminal articles he had published in Yoga Journal in the mid 1970s. Well, Joel never went back to Pune, never went back to study with Iyengar. He took that method and ran with it, popularized it, as Joel had already basically retired, rather, he didn't retire. He disappeared to his little house on the bluff of Bolinas Bay in north of San Francisco with his partner, Diana Alstad. I met Joel in 2009. He became a very, very dear friend. He passed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, excuse me, 2.5 years ago, in November. So he became a very, very dear friend and a bit of a teacher. He rejected that title, that relationship with me. We became really good friends. He very much convinced me of the importance of that idea of being guided from within. You feel what you feel in there, but I need to go a little bit further than that. I think, and I say this, I write this, the best teacher you'll ever have is alive and well inside of you. And much of this practice is about learning to listen to that teacher and honor that teacher. But as much as I am open to my inner teacher, I want other teachers to give me guidance as well, especially teachers with a trained eye, with a deeper understanding of things than I have, whether about whatever aspect of practice it is, from the contemplative, the energetic aspects of practice to the pure postural, whatever it is. So half moon to triangle, problematic. Triangle to half moon, excuse me, back away from that. Uh, Revolved half moon to half moon, or warrior three to half moon, closed to open hips or open to close on the standing leg, problematic, I'll suggest. That said, what do I say to my students? Play with it, but as you play with it, I want you to please be aware that there are these potential possibilities here. I still demonstrate what not to do, Todd, and I'm not always sure that's the wisest thing to do. Demonstrating what not to
Yeah.
do. Be
Hey
careful,
guys, look
yoga
at this. Don't
teachers.
do this. Yeah.
Yeah, and after a while you go, "Ah," often I'll demonstrate what
Why
not to
did I
do, and
do
the
that?
next day I'm going, I wish I hadn't shown them that, I'm feeling it in my hip. The last little comment, as I mentioned hips, is on this. I'm not gonna out anybody who hasn't already outed themselves on this, if you will. A it's increasingly clear that many teachers, such as myself, who've done extreme contortionist practices, think first, second, and third series Ashtanga, or any of the, say, any half of the postures in light on yoga. So it's not just one style, or Bikram method, or whatever method of deep practices of yoga. Many people who've been doing it for long periods of time now, we're finally getting the 20 and 30-year studies. Not that they're formal studies, but we have the people who have a disproportionate number of things like hip replacements, absolutely blowing out lower backs, significant knee issues. And so, well, Joel Kramer, who was a huge influencer of yoga in the 1960s here in California. I mean, he introduced Anna Forrest, Judith Lassiter. A lot of people came through Joel early on, not necessarily introduced to yoga by him, but hugely influenced in the 60s and 70s. Um, Many of Joel had dual hip replacements. He suggests to me that much of the issues he had in his hip resulted from things he was doing, as I did, putting both legs behind your back and then doing other things with your legs there, arm balances and a variety of things, the Dvipada Shirsasana, Yoga Drasana forms and all. And beyond that, in third and fourth series, Ashtanga Vinyasa, Jill Miller writes about it in her, where's that book? It's right there,
Yeah.
Bindi Yoga.
Yes.
She writes the forward to that book about her hip replacement. So Jill taught at my LA Yoga Center when I had that studio, and she taught. I loved Jill's classes. She'd come up through Anna Forrest yoga. She had her own deeper learning of anatomy, much as I've gone way beyond my original teachers in learning about anatomy and kinesiology and all. Jill had deep insight, and at the same time, as I was doing with deep insight, I'll suggest, still teaching extreme contortionist forms. I don't think it was necessarily the wisest way to go. I'm really seriously questioning this. Dharma Mitra is another teacher. If you talk to him, I encourage you to ask him about his body, and talk to Richard Freeman, who completed fifth series of Ashtanga Vinyasa, about his low back, and ask them about how they teach yoga now compared to how they taught it 20 years ago. And I think a lot of us of that generation, and there are others who have been teaching yoga for longer. I've only been teaching yoga for 27 years. Some have been teaching it for 47 years. Ask them, and practicing consistently. Ask them about their practices and their teaching after all of that. Okay, I'll stop. Excuse me.
No, I'm just like in full agreement. I can't agree more, Mark. And I think that's why at the time that I read your book, I was unaware of my completely blown out lower back, and now am aware of my completely blown out lower back. And having done all the second series back bending day after day, getting pulled in, catching my heels in Kapotasana, legs behind the head every single day, and not listening to my body until it got to the point where I couldn't walk, I couldn't get out of bed, right? So um and now as a teacher
Mm.
and still loving Ashtanga yoga and still holding down in Mysore Ashtanga room every day, I will not pull on somebody in the Kapotasana. I am not trying to get people's hands to their feet. I mean, I just can't in my own conscience after feeling it in my own body and what sort of unfortunate things can occur. I don't know that I can necessarily say 100% that the Kapotasana back bending and the grabbing and the pulling was the main source of the dysfunction. I've suffered falls, I've suffered hospitalizations due to bad injuries over the years. I've been in extreme sports and all that. But I agree with you. And I'm so happy to hear this. I'm so thankful we're having this conversation. I think this is of absolute importance. And I think that if we obviously we're learning from experience and we're suffering the consequences of our experiences at the same time, I don't regret. I'm glad I did. I feel like I'm still learning now to move in a completely different way, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to relearn everything all over again and how humbling it is. I'm so happy to hear this from you and to know that I'm not alone, and that we are able to share this information with other people that are up and coming. Now, the thing that I grapple with is that in my 20s, had I'd heard you say this, would I've listened? I don't know that I would have, unfortunately. I mean,
I'm with you.
I got so much exhilaration out of the practice. It was so fun. It was so exciting. I mean, it was like every day I couldn't wait to get there. And it was just so amazing. Now I'm just happy to have this conversation because I think it is really important. And I am enjoying having conversations with students and letting them know I just want to let you know I have a bad back. And and what I'm showing you, is there a way we could do, say, camel pose? I really want you to listen to your body right now. And if you are feeling anything that is telling you not to do this, like, it is important to start listening to those signals early on.
I love it.
Don't wait until you're getting that MRI and the doctor's saying, let's fuse you together. Let's bolt you
Yes,
back together
I'm
again.
with you.
When I got that diagnosis, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not the vision I had. This is not. I got into yoga thinking I was going to be that 80, 90-year-old guy doing headstands and being super fit and having no problems or pain in my body at all. And now I'm a little like going, wow. If I'd had, but again, we are where we are. We learn from what we learned. And now I think this conversation is very important. So thank you for,
May I say a few more things about that?
yes, please.
Okay.
Yes,
So
please.
here, a few things is I get the point about, say, younger people who won't hear it. Um, I was an adrenaline junkie, I think, from when I came out of the womb. I was just like into it, whatever it was. Um, I used to build and race very fast motorcycles, cafe racers. I also crashed them.
Yeah.
I got into rock climbing. I was an AMGA certified rock climbing guide at one point. I was a hardcore rock climber. And I also, by the way, no one's ever been hurt rock climbing. They only get hurt rock falling. And I fell a few times, right? Kind of a joke there, but yes. But yeah, I mean, I got, a dislocated shoulder, skull fracture from falls. Recently in my fruit orchard, up pretty high on two ladders, positioned to balance with a chainsaw to trim off the top of an old um, persimmon tree, I had to leap, and I sustained two compression fractures in my lumbar segment, L1 and L3 compression fractures, which you'd think you'd have if you have osteoporosis. I don't have osteoporosis, but I have compression fractures. So injuries happen, and they also happen in yoga. There were a few things that you said I want to come to, and that is one of them is about and talking with younger students as well, not just younger, all of our students, about what it means to have a balance between effort and ease. This is a constant thing. Sthira sukham asanam, stability and ease, and to have a balance of effort and ease in cultivating sthira sukham, if you will. Um, what are the signs? How do we know where we are? How far is far enough? I have this sort of saying playfully, it's not about how far you go, but how you go. And what you said about, acknowledging, listening to things like pain, the signals that come to us. It's so important. The little thing, I used to tell myself in practice, oh, it's just a little pinch. Like the sitting bone, where the hamstring originates at the ischial tuberosity, the sitting bone. That little, it's not called yoga butt, where the tendon starts to fray, like a pinching sensation. Oh, it's just a little pinch. Student says, oh, it's just a little pinch. Low back, oh, just a little pinch. Those little pinches are tissues saying, please don't do that, or back away. Take it
Yeah.
easy,
Yes.
approach it differently. And
Yes.
so, how do we convey that to our students? I think there's a variety of ways to try to convey that to them in ways that don't make them walk on eggshells. We don't want to, because that is another problem. If oh, at the risk of injuring this and the risk of
Hmm.
injuring that, you might
Hmm.
maybe try this, but be careful. Then they're all tight. They're all
I'm scared.
nervous.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
going to be a problem that might lead to injury or
Sure.
burnout or whatever it
Mhm.
is. So finding that balance is really, really important. I'm very curious well, this is with deep respect to Tirumalai Krishnamacharya. Yoga genius, gave us much of what we have today in yoga comes, his progeny from Patabi Joyce, to a sexual predator, I must note, to Iyengar, also a problematic character, I'll suggest, in his authoritarian ways, but also brilliantly insightful yoga teacher, gave us all those props. Desikachar, and others who come, Ramaswamy, Indra Devi, who come from Krishnamacharya directly. Krishnamacharya, brilliantly insightful. Okay, let's just take primary series Ashtanga Vinyasa for a moment. Marchyasana D. Well, Setu Bandhasana is in there. So is Marchyasana D. Okay, consider what's happening in Marchyasana D. One foot in lotus, the other foot is drawn in, flexed hip, flexed knee. wrap around that direction, wrap clasp. Well, aside from the fact that a very small part of humanity will ever be able to do that pose, it's one of the reasons Brian Kest bailed out of Ashtanga Vinyasa at Yoga Works. We were all students together there, and started doing what he later would call power yoga. He couldn't do Marshasana D. There's no way his hips would ever allow it. And meanwhile, we're asked to do all these forward bends and back bends throughout the primary series. There's a lot of potential stress to the lumbar segment of the spine, especially lumbar segment. And yet we have to wait to get to second series to do the absolutely best posture for strengthening and developing the musculature of the lower back, Shalabhasana. Little locus A, locus B, not necessarily C, because your arms are out, it's a lot more force in the lower back because of the how far you are from the fulcrum of the lever, if you will. But locus A, locus B, sort of low cobra, really good for developing the muscles of the lower back, for developing the multifidus, their spinal erectors, the QLs, and hip extensors. All of this helping us develop the foundation upon which to have a safer, deeper back bending practice and other aspects of practice by strengthening that set of posterior chain, if you will, muscles that we develop. And so why do you have to wait to get through primary series? And back in the day when I came up through Ashtanga, you had to have, they call it mastered, I don't necessarily like the term, primary. That is, you had to be able to do primary without losing your breath, without any difficulty in moving into and out of an asana. Only then would my teacher at that time, Chuck Miller, say, okay, you can go to second series, which had a key, a gate at the beginning of it called Pashasana, a very, very difficult
Noose.
posture for
Tie you
most.
up in the noose like your first
And
one.
he
Here
would
you
not allow you to go to the second posture, exactly, noose pose,
go.
Pashasana, deep like a chair wrap, as you know. So you wouldn't get the second posture, Kranchiasana, until you had Sthira Sukham Asanam with Pashasana. That was the gatekeeper. So when he came around one day and said second, I was like, oh my God, I'd wanted it so bad for so long, second series. He made me wait until he knew I didn't want it or was thinking about it, I think. And I wasn't thinking about it. I was in my practice. He came by one day and he said, second series, Pashasana. So I did Pashasana. I started to go to Kranchasana. He said, no, Pashasana only today. And for 3 months, it was only Pashasana. He wouldn't let me do, until I had Pashasana, I couldn't go on. The
Yes.
point of that is that I had to get through that and Kranchiasana before I could get to basic, simple locus pose. Why? And we could then look more closely at the primary, second, and third series. Those are the ones I know well from personal direct practice for many years. I know of fourth. I've never done a fourth practice as in a consistent way. I played around with it. And that was one of the reasons I jumped off the Ashtanga train. I'm like, I'm not going to do that to my body. Just look at fourth series. It's like, wow, okay. I'm inspired. Like I am at Cirque du Soleil.
Extreme as you can go. One
Yeah. So
direction, as
how
extreme as you
far
can
do
go
you
the other
need to
direction.
go?
Yeah.
And that's, I'm working on something now on hypermobility. I might write something more. There's a number of books out there, Bindi Yoga, Bindi People, and there are a few other good books out there on it. How far do you need to go? How far is far enough and for what reason? And especially if you are already have hypermobility in some of your joints or all of your joints, why do you need to go further? And there are some that would make the case that, well, frankly, some in the yin community, and Bernie Clark, who I love, but we've had this discussion on my podcast, will suggest that you only activate and fulfill Wolff's law if you create significant force in that joint. And so it's not just a problem it's not a problem that you hyperextend, it's beneficial to hyperextend because it's only there that you're getting the adequate force of bone to bone to stimulate osteoblasts and maintain the health of the bone. And it's like, I don't think so. That puts asymmetrical force against those bones,
Start questioning
unduly
that too.
wears the cartilage in that joint, and creates other problems. For great insight of that, I highly recommend a book by maybe one of the greatest orthopedic surgeons ever in the world. His name is Roy Meals, and the title of his book is Bones. I know Roy personally from surgery on my brother 50 years ago, literally 50 years ago on my brother for a shoulder. And Roy, by the way, did before he retired, microscopic limb reconstruction. So to get your hand chopped off, like literally your hand chopped off, he puts it back together and can make it work. He understands bone, ligaments, muscles,
Yes.
fascia, tendons, nerves, all of that. And anyway, so his book Bones, very insightful. And
Oh,
then talking with Roy 2 years ago, in preparation for the podcast with Bernie, he's like, they say to do what? To do what? To go beyond range of healthy range of motion and have force in there in that. So think of triangle pose with a locked out knee, or tree pose with a locked out knee. And many in the yoga community are saying, not only is that not a problem, but it's beneficial to your bones. Take another look is all I want to suggest, is that take another look at that question. And I'm happy, by the way, if you ever want to have a few people on your podcast and have a panel discussion debate, happy to, in a
ooh.
loving, kind, and respectful way, to engage with other people on all those sorts of questions
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up
and
because
have the conversation.
just yesterday, I have someone who's been sending me debates, and I've been watching debates across all different topics. And I thought I need to create a debate podcast, and I'll be the moderator. Let's get two I don't want to say opposing views, but just maybe slightly different views. And so thank you, Mark. I'm going to take you up on that. And
Bernie and I agree on probably 98% of everything in the world: history, philosophies of yoga, aspects of practice, the beauty of yin, the beauty of yang, the details of human anatomy and physiology. But there's a couple percent where we don't agree, and I'll be more than happy to engage with other people,
oh my
including
gosh.
around the question of, this is a big one, I think, is the way that fascia is discussed today.
Okay.
Most teachers refer to the fascia,
Okay.
the fascia.
This is a
Well,
this
which
is
fascia?
yes.
Squeeze your skin, you're squeezing the deep dermal layer, a type of fascia. The IT band, which is a very dense, high collagen, low elastin. This is high elastin, low collagen. It's a very different fiber, very different tissue. The tissue that surrounds your visceral organs is also a type of fascia. There are at least 12 different types of fascia. And so the idea that the fascia is a thing, a system, it's even called the fascial system by some, or as Paul Greeley writes in his, I love Paul. I've known him from before he was a yin teacher. He was a Taoist yoga student with all of us in Paulie Zink's classes at Yoga Works in Santa Monica, yin yang. He ran with the yin, and he writes on the beginning of his book that fascia is the primary organizing principle of the body. Like, really? Let's have a conversation about that.
Mm,
So please
mm.
organize it. I'd be happy to respectfully come on and listen and
Thank you.
share and
Thank you, Mark.
keep it. Yes, please.
Ah, I'm excited. I mean, I knew I was very excited for today's conversation, but it's far exceeded my expectations. I'm so appreciative for you to donate your time, your knowledge, your what you've learned over the years, and to explain it in a way I feel is down to earth and we can understand. I'm so excited for our listeners to get a chance to meet you, or if they already know you, to get to hear some of your ideas. I look forward to having future conversations, Mark, because man, so cool. I like how you're blending all this together. And I just am really honored. Thank you so much for taking this time. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And I can't wait to have more opportunities to learn from you because I really do value what you're bringing to the table.
Todd, I really appreciate what you're doing here with your podcast and what you bring to it, your sensibilities and your openness. I appreciate very much that you invited me to be your guest, and I've enjoyed this. Not so much a conversation as me talking too much, but as you look at my books, they tend to be rather thick, voluminous
Well,
books.
I'm here
Trying
to
to
listen
figure
to
out.
you. Everybody gets to listen to me all the time. I want to hear you. So thank you for sharing and
You're
for
so
offering
welcome.
that. Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Well, until next time.
Beautiful. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.